All right, Chapter 2, Section 6. This is Part 1 of 2.6. We're going to learn about special functions, but the type of special function we're going to look at today are piecewise functions. So these are functions that are broken up into different pieces. So piecewise functions. So we're going to be graphing piecewise functions. We can skip this whole first part and just focus on this little study tip. So graphs of piecewise defined functions. There are the graphs of different parts of a piecewise defined function may or may not connect. A graph may also stop at a given x value and then begin at a different y value for the same value of x. So just a little note here saying that our graph is broken up into pieces, and not all of the time are those pieces going to connect to each other. So this brings us to our first example. So we need to graph f of x is equal to x minus 2 if x is less than negative 1, and x plus 3 if x is greater than or equal to negative 1. So we're going to be graphing. And in order to graph, we need to find points. So the first part, we're breaking this up into two different equations. So we're just looking at our first equation now, just the top part of this piecewise function, our first piece. Always, when graphing piecewise functions, we want to plug in the number that's given to us. So we're going to find f of negative 1, and we use the equation that's given to us in that first piece. So negative 1 minus 2. We just plug negative 1 in for x. What is negative 1 minus 2? Negative 3. So now our point is negative 1, because we plugged negative 1 in for x, so that's our x value, and our y value is negative 3. So we just get our x and our y. Now we're going to graph this point, but before we graph it, we need to know if there's going to be an open circle or closed circle here. So just like when we were graphing things on a number line, if we have less than or greater than, we're going to have an open circle. If it's less than or equal to or greater than or equal to, we have a closed circle. So if there's that line underneath it, we fill in the circle. So here we're just looking at x's less than negative 1. So do we have an open circle or a closed circle? Open circle. So we're going to go to the left 1 and down 3 and graph this point with an open circle. Now we want to plug in another point to see where exactly this piece of the graph is going to go. We have to see what was given here. So we have x is less than negative 1. So the next piece we're going to plug in is some number that is less than negative 1. So what's a number less than negative 1? Negative 2. So let's plug in negative 2. So negative 2 minus 2 is what? Negative 4. So what would our point here be? Negative 2, negative 4. Remember, we get our x and our y. So now we're still dealing with the first part, our first piece. So we're going to go to the left 2 and down 4 and put another dot there. And we're talking about all the values of x that are less than negative 1. So less than is everything to the left, so we're going to put an arrow pointing left. So we connect our two dots and put an arrow pointing left. So that's it for our first piece. Now we're going to look at the second one. So first thing we do is plug in the number that's given to us. So we're going to plug in negative 1. So we have f of negative 1 is equal to negative 1 plus 3. Negative 1 plus 3 is 2. So what's our point here?
Negative 1 and 2.
Negative 1, 2. So we're going to go to the left 1 and up 2. Are we going to put an open circle or closed circle here?
Closed circle?
A closed circle because we have greater than or equal to. So that equal to means that we have a closed circle. So left 1, up 2, and closed circle there. Now we need to plug in another point to see what our graph is going to do. So we need to plug in a point that is greater than, negative 1. So what's a number greater than negative 1? 0. So we're going to plug in f of 0. When we plug in 0, we have 0 plus 3, which is 3. So what's our point here? 0 to 3. So 0, 3. So we stay on 0 and go up to 3. We put a point there, and now we connect our two dots with the line. We're going to skip the identify the domain and range for now because I just want to focus on graphing. So I just want you guys to get the hang of graphing before we get into the domain and range. So any questions on this one? Ready for the next? All right, let's look at our next one. Again, we're graphing our piecewise function. So we start with our first piece. We have x plus 2 if f with x is less than 0. So what's the first thing we need to plug in here? Remember, we always plug in the number that's given. So it gives us 0, so we plug in 0. So we have f of 0 is equal to 0 plus 2. 0 plus 2 is 2. So what's our point here? 0, 2. Do we have an open circle or closed circle? Open. So we stay on 0 and go up 2 and put an open circle there. Now we need to plug in another point. We have x is less than 0, so we need to plug in a number that is less than 0. What's a number less than 0? Negative 1. We can plug in any number less than 0. If we wanted to plug in negative 7, we could plug in negative 7. But let's plug in negative 1. So we have negative 1 plus 2. What's negative 1 plus 2? 1. So then what's our point here? Negative 1, 1.
Negative 1 and 1.
So we go to the left 1 and go up 1, and then we just connect our two dots with a line. Now we're ready to move on to our second part, to our second piece of this function. What number are we going to plug in first?
0.
0. We plug in what it gives us. So what's f of 0? When we plug in 0 for x, what do we get? 0. So then what's our point? 0, 0. Is it an open circle or closed circle? Closed. So at 0, 0, we put a closed circle. Now we always have to plug in 2 points for each one. So we need to plug in another point that is greater than 0. What's the number greater than 0? 1.
1.
So what do we get when we plug in 1? 1. So we have 1, comma, 1. So we go to the right 1, up 1. And then we're talking about all the values of x that are greater than, so we're going to go to the right. So this is our graph of our piecewise function. Okay, here we have 3 pieces of our function. So let's start with our first. So we have 2x plus 3 if x is less than 1. What are we going to plug in here?
The 1.
1. We plug in what it gives us. So we have 2 times 1 plus 3. What's 2 times 1 plus 3? 5. So then what's our point? 1, 5. Do we have an open circle or closed circle? An open circle. Because this is just less than, it's an open circle. So we go to the right 1 and up 5. Put an open circle. Now what else can we plug in? 0. We can plug in any number less than 1. So we can plug in 0. So we have 2 times 0 plus 3, which is what? 3. So what's our point? 0, 3. So we stay on 0, go up 3, and we're going to put a line through these 2 points. So we always start at the first point and then go through the second point. Next, we're going to look at our second piece. Here it gives us 2 numbers. We're talking about all the values from 1 to 2. So we're going to plug in 1 and we plug in 2. So we can't pick a number for the second piece to plug in. We just plug in what it gives us. So we have f of 1, which is negative 1 plus 2. What's negative 1 plus 2? 1. So what's our point here? 1, 1. Do we have an open circle or closed circle? Closed circle. So we go to 1, 1, put a closed circle. Now we plug in the second point it gives us, which is 2. So we have negative 2 plus 2. What's negative 2 plus 2? 0. So what's our second point here? 2, 0. So we go to the right 2 and stay on 0. Do we have an open circle or closed circle? It's less than or equal to, so that's a closed circle. So whenever we do the middle part, if there's 3 parts in our piecewise function, we don't put an arrow through the 2 points. All we do is connect the 2 points with a line. So we just connect our 2 points. There's no arrows for the middle part. All right, now we're ready for the third part. So we have 3 if x is greater than 2. So we're going to plug in 2 first. What do we get when we plug in 2?
2.
What's our equation here?
Oh, it's 3.
It's 3. So whatever we plug in, we're going to get 3. So when we plug in 2, there's nothing to plug it in, we just get 3. So when our x is 2, our y is 3. So what's our point? 2, 3. Do we have an open circle or closed circle? Open. So we go to the right 2 and go up 3 and put an open circle. Now what else can we plug in?
The 0? Wait, no, wait. I think.
So we're talking about values that are greater than 2. So what's a number greater than 2? 3. What do we get when we plug in 3? 3. So what's our point? 3, 3. And since we're talking about everything that's greater than 2, our arrow goes right. So we put a point at 3, 3, and then connect our 2 dots and just go to the right. So our first piece, our arrow is always going to be pointing some direction left. It could be left and up, just left, or left and down. Our middle piece is always just going to connect our 2 points. And then our third piece is always going to be an arrow pointing right. And then remember, you always have to plug in 2 numbers for everything. So we plug in 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Always plug in 2 numbers for each piece. Any questions on this one?
Miss Carter, how do you know when it's open or closed?
So we have to look at the sign here. So this is just a less than sign. So if it's less than or greater than, it's an open circle. If it's less than or equal to or greater than or equal to, then it is a closed circle. So if there's that line underneath, then we close the circle.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Any other questions on this one? All right, last one. Yay. So what do we do first? What's our first number that we plug in?
-4.
-4. So we're starting with our first piece, and we plug in the number that's given. So we have f of -4. What do we get when we plug in -4?
-3.
-3. No matter what we plug in, our y is always going to be -3 since it's a constant. So what's our point?
-4, -3.
-4, -3. Do we have an open circle or closed circle? A closed circle.
Closed.
So we're going to go to the left 4 and down 3. And put our closed circle there. Now that's one point that we plugged in. We need to plug in another number. So what else can we plug in here? -5. We can plug in any number that's less than -4. So let's plug in -5. What do we get when we plug in -5? -3. We always get -3 since it's just -3. So what's our point?
-5,
-5, -3. So we go to the left 5 and go down 3. Do we put an arrow going through these points or just connect them?
Connect them.
It's the first one, so we put an arrow. Is our arrow going to go to the left or point right? To the left.
The other one.
So remember, our first one always points some direction left. It can go left and up, left and down, just to the left, but it's going to go left because we're talking about all of the small numbers, all the negative numbers. So just think it's always going to go in the direction that the sign is here. So see, our arrow points this direction. All right, so once we plugged in 2 points and drew our line, we can move on to the next piece. So we have x, if x is from -4 to 2. So what are we going to plug in here?
2.
2. What do we get when we plug in 2?
-4.
Remember, our equation here is x. So we're plug in 2 for x, which is just 2. So when we plug in 2, we get 2. So what's our point? 2, 2.
2, 2.
Are we going to put an open circle or closed circle? An open circle.
Open. Open.
So we go to the right 2 and up 2. Put an open circle. What can we plug in next? Does it give us a number here to plug in? -4. We always plug in what it gives us, and in the middle one, it's always going to give us the 2 numbers to plug in. So always for the middle one, we plug in the 2 numbers that it gives us. So now we plug in -4. What do we get when we plug in -4? -4. So what's our point? -4, -4.
-4.
Do we have an open circle or closed circle? An open circle. So we go 4, 4, -4, -4. So we're going to the left 4, and then down 4. So our point's going to be right here, and we connect our 2 dots. So always for the middle one, you just connect the 2 dots. There's no arrow in the middle one, so you just go from this point to this point. Ready for the third one? Yes. What are we going to plug in first?
The 2.
Let's plug in 2. So we have -2 plus 6. What's -2 plus 6? 4. So what's our point here? 2,
2 and 4.
4. Do we have an open circle or closed circle?
Close.
Closed circle. So we go to the right 2 and up 4. And put a closed circle there. Next, what can we plug in? We can plug in any number that is greater than 2. So let's plug in 6. We could plug in 3. Any number greater than 2 would work. But I heard 6 first, so let's plug in 6. So when we plug in 6, we have -6 plus 6. What's -6 plus 6? 0. So what's our point here? 6, 0. So we're going to go to the right 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and stay on 0. Are we just going to connect these 2 dots or put an arrow through them? And which direction is our arrow going to go if we put an arrow?
To the right.
Arrow to the right. So we go through both of our points and put an arrow to the right. So this is our graph. Any questions from the notes today?